He had built empires from nothing, but today as he boarded a first-class flight, no one cared who he was. The flight attendants whispered, glancing at his wrinkled hands and worn shoes, and then did the unthinkable. They asked him to move. A younger white man smirked as he took the seat he'd paid for. Passengers watched, silent, pretending not to notice. No one knew the truth, that this old black man owned the very company they worked for, and when the plane landed, the humiliation they caused would cost them everything. For most of his life, Charles Donovan had believed that dignity and discipline could break any barrier. Born in the Deep South during segregation, he grew up watching his mother scrub floors in white households while his father worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. Every door he ever knocked on had been slammed in his face, yet he never stopped knocking. Through sheer resilience, Charles became one of the country's most respected aviation innovators. He started small, 1 plane, 3 employees, and a belief that excellence had no color. Decades later, his airline had become a global name. But success never made him forget his roots. He dressed modestly, preferred quiet travel, and often booked tickets under aliases to see how his employees treated ordinary people. This trip was supposed to be routine, a short flight to New York for a surprise inspection. He carried no entourage, no briefcase of power, only a worn leather wallet and a heart full of memories. The airport buzzed around him. Businessmen in tailored suits, attendants greeting wealthy travelers, and digital screens flashing names that never sounded like his. When the boarding call echoed, Charles smiled softly, clutching his ticket for seat 1A. The irony? That seat had been his favorite spot since his very first flight as a janitor decades ago, the day he had promised himself that one day he'd sit there as the man who owned the sky. But fate had other plans. The same prejudice he'd fought his whole life was about to greet him again, not in a boardroom but right there, 30,000 feet above the clouds. As Charles settled into seat 1A, the hum of the jet engines seemed almost soothing, a familiar lullaby from a lifetime in the skies. The cabin smelled of fresh leather and coffee. He quietly adjusted his seatbelt, placed his small travel bag under the seat, and nodded politely to the crew. To anyone watching, he looked like just another elderly man trying to enjoy a peaceful flight. But soon the whispers began. A flight attendant leaned toward another, her tone hushed but sharp enough for nearby passengers to hear. "He's not supposed to be in that seat," she muttered. Another man, tall, white, dressed in designer clothes, stood near the entrance, ticket in hand, irritation painted across his face. "That's my seat," he said flatly. Charles turned, calm and dignified. "I believe there's been a mistake," he replied softly, offering his boarding pass. The attendant barely looked at it before shaking her head. "Sir, please step aside. This seat is reserved." People nearby watched, phones out, pretending to scroll but secretly recording. Some smirked. Others turned away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. It was the same silence Charles had seen too many times before, the silence that sided with power, the silence that crushed the soul. He didn't argue. Instead, he stood quietly gathering his belongings, his eyes steady and calm. The white man brushed past him with a scoff, tossing his designer jacket onto the seat like a trophy. The attendants thanked him with plastic smiles, pretending the scene was normal. Charles was escorted to economy class. The aisle felt longer than ever. Every step seemed to echo decades of struggle. Every insult, every rejection, every reminder that no matter how far he'd climbed, some people still refused to look up. He sat down in a narrow middle seat between 2 strangers, neither making eye contact. He folded his hands, closed his eyes, and exhaled. He had been humiliated before, but this time felt different. This wasn't just ignorance. It was arrogance, the kind that came from assuming power without earning it. The flight took off. As clouds rolled beneath them, Charles reflected on the cruel irony of it all, that the very people who disrespected him worked under his name, in his company, flying his planes. Yet they couldn't see past the color of his skin. When the captain's voice came over the speakers, Charles recognized it immediately, one of the pilots he had personally trained years ago. His lips curved into a faint smile. Not a smile of revenge, but one of quiet resolve. He knew that when this flight touched down, silence would no longer protect the guilty. By the time the attendants prepared for landing, they still had no idea who was sitting silently in row 18. They had no clue that the man they dismissed like baggage was about to turn their entire world upside down. When the wheels touched the runway, the seatbelt signs blinked off, and so did every fake smile in that cabin. Charles rose slowly, adjusting his jacket, his movements calm but deliberate. The flight attendants were already by the exit, thanking passengers as if nothing had happened. Their voices were syrup-sweet, their posture rehearsed. Charles waited until the line formed, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a black ID card, glossy, simple, unmistakable. At the top, printed in silver letters, were the words, Founder Chief Executive Officer, Skylink Air. He handed it quietly to the lead attendant. Her eyes widened, color draining from her face. The smile froze. Sir, I didn't realize. He didn't let her finish. No, he said, voice low but firm. You didn't care. The captain, alerted through the crew channel, stepped out of the cockpit, his expression shifting instantly from confusion to dread. Every uniformed face in that cabin turned pale as recognition spread like wildfire. The man they had shamed, the man they had asked to move, wasn't just a passenger. He was their boss. Their top boss. Charles looked around the cabin. The same passengers who had watched in silence were now whispering, eyes darting, phones rising again. But this time they were recording something else. Accountability. He spoke calmly, not shouting, not gloating. When I built this airline, he said, I wanted it to represent respect for everyone. Somewhere along the way that message was lost. He paused, glancing at the attendants who could barely stand upright now. It's found again today. Then he turned to the captain. Ground HR will meet you all as soon as we land at the gate. The silence that followed was deafening. The attendants looked shattered, the arrogance gone. Charles walked off the plane not with anger, but with quiet authority. The terminal staff saluted as he passed, unsure what to say. Cameras flashed. Justice this time hadn't come with shouting or threats. It came in the form of dignity, the kind only earned by a man who never needed to prove who he was. Outside the terminal, sunlight poured through the glass walls, glinting off the silver planes lined on the tarmac, each one carrying his name. Charles walked slowly, each step steady, the sound of his shoes echoing like closure. He wasn't angry anymore. He didn't need to be. The humiliation they tried to give him had turned into their own lesson, one that would ripple across every corner of the company. Within hours, the story spread, not through gossip but through silence. The staff spoke in whispers about the man in 1A. HR meetings were called. Sensitivity training was reintroduced. But more than anything, people began to look twice before judging someone who didn't fit their image of success. Charles returned to his office the next day. The same hands that had once wiped airplane floors now signed executive orders with calm precision. On his desk sat a small photo of his mother, her tired smile frozen in time. He whispered softly, "We made it, Mama. They can't move us anymore." He looked out over the city skyline, the sun breaking through the clouds like it always did after the storm. The injustice had been public, but so was the redemption. And somewhere in that same airport, another young black man boarded a flight, holding his head a little higher, walking a little prouder, unaware that someone had just cleared the skies for him. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. It walks in quietly, in a tailored suit with patience and with power earned through grace. Racism didn't win that day, dignity did. And as Charles's plane took off once again, it carried more than passengers. It carried a message. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just own the ground you stand on. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let's make sure stories like this remind the world. Respect should never depend on color.